Investigative journalism cracked one of the CIA's darkest Cold War experiments. In the early 1970s, the agency covertly greenlit something called Operation MKOFTEN. According to investigative journalist Gordon Thomas, CIA research scientists were tasked with exploring the occult. Now, not as believers, but as observers. Our front quietly helped fund a sorcery course at an American university, around 250 students. Agency personnel studied fertility rites, black magic, even the practice of raising the dead. At the same time, the official program files were labeled MKOFTEN. It's a program about drugs and human behavior involving Army labs and Navy contracts. And later on, for some reason, an abrupt kill order from director Richard Helms. 2 words: read, destroy. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. We're opening up the files on Operation MKOFTEN, MKOFTEN for short. As usual, I'll weigh in on this after it's all said and done. Before we follow Operation MKOFTEN into the weird, let's get to know a little bit more about the MK world. You may have heard of MKULTRA. That's the CIA program that, beginning in the 1950s, probed ways to alter human behavior and perception. The government engaged in drug research, hypnosis attempts, sensory deprivation, using a web of fronts and university contacts as cover. Now, in 1973, many records were destroyed. By 1975 to 77, Senate investigations put whatever records managed to survive the purge on the record. Key takeaway: MK was a prefix, not a single project. It's like an alphabet of technical behavioral operations, like MKULTRA, MKSEARCH, MKChitwit, and the topic of this video, MKOFTEN. MKOFTEN appears in dry clinical language. A government operation to test behavioral and toxicological effects of certain compounds. The paper names Edgewood Arsenal, it notes ONR as cover funding conduit, and it records human exposure in 1973. 2 military volunteers with an incapacitating nerve agent, EA 3167. That's the official government narrative. But investigative journalist Gordon Thomas attaches a second story to the name MKOFTEN. He writes about an agency branch called Operation MKOFTEN. It delved into occult practices and actually maintained a staff of astrologers on salary. Got that? The operation also conducted weird tests, like a UN experiment with a medium and a university sorcery course, whose results the agency scientists studied until the kill order was given. 2 sides of one government program, the official narrative and Thomas's story. Let's take a look. Thomas titles the chapter The Devil Seekers. By May 1971, 3 professional astrologers were on payroll, $350 a week plus expenses. Not bad. They were tasked with predicting the future. Thomas describes briefings where long-bearded men or gypsy-garbed women explained lifelines and how to read bumps on a person's head to agency behaviorists. One San Francisco astrologer was exposed as a fraud, but they still got paid for their fees and travel. Thomas describes a field test inside the United Nations building. A medium is escorted through the public areas while an operative films discreetly. The instruction? Signal whenever he felt an evil type of personality. Got that? The outcome? Well, for that run, no hits recorded in the building that day. The attempt itself is the story here. The CIA was purportedly testing belief. Agents sometimes presented themselves as Scientific Engineering Institute staff. That's a CIA-linked front near Boston tied to Polaroid. Through that conduit, Thomas says that the institute helped fund a sorcery course at the University of South Carolina. MKOFTEN scientists studied results involving fertility rites, initiation rites, and necromancy, or the raising of the dead. The agency even reached out to a New York Monsignor overseeing exorcisms. Their request was denied. The operation then reached out to public occultists, including Sybil Leek. She was known as the Houston Sorceress. She was pretty famous enough to bring her pet crow on camera wherever she went. Kind of weird. December 10th, 1972. According to Thomas, director Richard Helms shuts down Operation MKOFTEN with a 1-line memo. Read, destroy. No appendix, no rationale, just the order. Thomas writes that Sidney Gottlieb pleaded with director Helms to keep the program running, but Helms refused. Inside ORD, a follow-up note cites cryptic reasoning, moral and ethical, and extremely sensitive security considerations. So we have occult hires and field tests, then an overnight kill order, and a warning that the operation had become too exposed, too sensitive, too dangerous. Let's get precise. What happened and when? What are the allegations? Then we ask which explanation fits the facts we actually have. May 1971, 3 professional astrologers are on payroll, $350 a week plus expenses, hired to apparently predict the future. Early 1972, the circle widens. Palm readers and clairvoyants brief agency behaviorists. One San Francisco astrologer is exposed as a fraud, but still gets paid his fee and travel. June 1973, in the official MKOFTEN paperwork, a small lab note appears. EA 3167, 2 military volunteers, and an incapacitating nerve agent exposure at Edgewood. So what actually fits this timeline? Well, 3 explanations. 1. Optics and oversight. This is most consistent with the language we have. A UN field run in a diplomatic building, a campus sorcery course with 250 students, agents presenting as institute staff. Thomas quoted ORD line, right? The moral and ethical considerations, extremely sensitive security stuff, right? It reads like a political blast radius. In 1972, cutting the occult branch with read destroy quickly lowers exposure while leaving the lab and the behavior contracts to wind down on their own. How about yields failure? This is actually supported by Thomas's incident report. The UN experiment logs no hits. We know that. An astrologer gets outed as a fraud, still gets paid. Those are negative signal data points. If the occult angle wasn't producing any actionable data, the risk to value ratio collapses. Again, arguing for a fast kill of the operation, but not necessarily the entire MK program. We also have the potential for tradecraft exposure. This certainly fits the mechanics, right? Public venues like the UN, academic institutions, fronts like the Institute, that's a wide net. If sources or covers or methods were at risk, a terse read destroy is exactly the kind of short memo you send when you don't want a long explanation, living in the files, eventually winding up on someone's podcast. Notice the split after December 1972. Thomas says MKOFTEN dies that day, but a lab note under MKOFTEN shows a human exposure experiment months later. The cleanest read of this is that MKOFTEN branch split. The occult fieldwork was terminated while the lab and behavior contracts were left to finish up. Or maybe they never ended. Now that the timeline and the motives line up, let's tighten the screws. What can we say for certain? What must we attribute to Thomas? And what, if any, questions should we still be asking? Let's stop talking about Thomas's story and instead show you how we can test it. 5 places where paper should exist if MKOFTEN ran the way Thomas describes. First up, the University of South Carolina, 1971 to 72. We're looking for course catalogs, departmental minutes, student paper coverage of any classes billed as sorcery, ritual, something similar to that, around 250 students. Departments that are most likely to host this include religious studies, anthropology, sociology, maybe special topic seminar. To prove it, I'd like to get my hands on a course catalog listing, a syllabus, maybe articles describing the course contents like fertility rites, raising the dead, to name a couple. That would be ideal. Next stop, Scientific Engineering Institute. Paperwork would be helpful. Thomas says officers use the SEI as cover and that the SEI helped fund the course. The trail lives in the corporate filings. Grant letters, any correspondence between SEI, Polaroid, and the university office would help. Would it prove it? I don't know, but I'd like to see maybe an SEI letter, an invoice, a memorandum that mentions course support, maybe even travel reimbursements tied to ritual studies. That would be a big help. Next up, the United Nations building run. Thomas describes a medium escorted through UN public areas with a covert camera. He was instructed to signal when he felt an evil type, whatever that means. It leaves a footprint in security passes, visitor logs, or maybe even filming permits. What would prove it would be a temporary filming authorization, maybe a grounds pass ledger entry for around early 1972, maybe a staff note indicating sensitives walkthrough, anything like that. Also, the New York Archdiocese Exorcism Office. Thomas says that an exorcism request was denied. Church files keep letters. What would prove it? Maybe a refusal letter, a diary entry, an internal memo noting a government approach about access to exorcism cases. I find it unlikely the church would offer that up, even assuming the evidence existed. They're known to be kind of tight-lipped about exorcisms and paranormal stuff. They play their cards close to the chest, and rightfully so. I'd also like to trace practitioner payments. Follow the money. By May 1971, Thomas names 3 astrologers who are getting paid $350 a week plus expenses. He says a San Francisco astrologer was exposed as a fraud. What would prove it? Show me the invoices, the expense vouchers, the 1099s, vendor cards from contractors that match astrology palm reading services. That would help, all within that window. If we discover documentation relating to any one of these claims, the university course paperwork, the SEI correspondences, UN pass logs, an archdiocese refusal, or maybe even a practitioner invoice, well, then it's a different story. We can effectively substantiate Thomas's claims. Now, I've sent out the FOIA requests, I've dug through the university records, I've done as much web sleuthing as possible. Now for my take on MKOFTEN. Here's my theory. I don't need anyone to believe in the occult to accept that an occult compartment could have lined up inside MKOFTEN. I'm saying the institutional pattern is real, and it makes Operation Often plausible. What am I talking about? What evidence? Well, how about some precedent? Exhibit A, Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA ran safe houses in San Francisco and New York where unwitting civilians were dosed with LSD. They were then watched behind one-way glass while sessions were recorded without the participants' knowledge. Front apartments, cash payments, covert human trials in the open world. So, if the agency would test drugs in a city apartment, a UN walkthrough with a psychic sensitive isn't really too much of a stretch, right? Exhibit B, Edgewood Arsenal human trials. For years, Army researchers ran human volunteer trials for incapacitating nerve agents. They observed long-lasting delirium and confusion. There's also a catalog of EA series compounds. We even see in MKOFTEN paperwork a 1973 note indicating that 2 military volunteers were dosed with EA3167. Bottom line, the concept of a lab testing for fringe human effects was already built, and it fed straight into the MK family of covert operations. Exhibit C, Dr. Ewan Cameron's psychic driving in Montreal. A CIA-funded front supported psychiatrist Ewan Cameron's extreme experiments. I'm talking sensory deprivation, massive electroconvulsive therapy, and taped psychic driving messages. Patients later reported devastating memory loss. That's not a cult. It's worse. It's behavior engineering under a benign-sounding cover. It proves that the agency mixed fronts, universities, and ethically explosive ideas. Exhibit D, the U.S. remote viewing programs. For nearly 2 decades, the U.S. intelligence paid labs and soldiers to try to see at a distance. These trials took place at Stanford Research Institute, Montauk, then Army units at Fort Meade. It ended in the mid-90s after an external review found that data was too unreliable for operations. Again, not a question of belief, it's the record. The government funded parapsychology because if it worked, even once, it might be something the government could weaponize. Now connect the dots. Fronts and conduits like safe houses, university shells, the institute cover, public venues like brothels, apartments, hospitals, and in Thomas's telling, the UN. Fringe human effects trials involving drugs, deprivation, parapsychology, potentially the belief in ritual. Finally, the cleanup. A terse kill order and the destruction of records when the optics turn sour. If that's the pattern, MKOFTEN fits. Not as sorcery, but as belief and influence lab. Perhaps an experiment designed to test how ritual, suggestion, and authority motivate people in the world. But then there's the December 10th, 1972 memo that said, "Read, destroy." It's exactly the kind of short note you'd write when danger isn't science, it's exposure. So no, I'm not asking you to believe in magic. I'm asking you to look at the institution, namely its methods and its history of going too far. Considering all the above, tell me if an occult compartment under MKOFTEN really sounds so outlandish. To me, it sounds like business as usual. Business that got too hot to live on paper. If you got receipts from the 1970s, maybe the University of South Carolina course catalogs, UN pass logs, Polaroid letters, shoot us an email. We'll update this episode with anything we can verify. For now, we're left with a chilling story from a reputable investigative journalist. Something to think about. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.